What is up, comrade Lefty? How you doing, buddy? Just, don't mind me. I'm just gonna go about this as if I was narrating a video, not live, as if I was recording it in Audacity or Sony Vegas. I'm just gonna go about what I would be talking about, which is I want to talk about why socialism sucks. And the reason why I'm making this is a user commented on my video, "Communism sucks," or "Why communism sucks," saying that he could feel my passion for libertarianism. But then he asked me, let me see if I can find the comment. Oh, whatever, I'll put it up in the video that I actually make, the more well-written video about why socialism sucks. Basically, and he was a nice guy, and I appreciated his comment. He was wanting to start a conversation, which is something that a lot of people don't do anymore. But he asked me if it would surprise me if he said that socialism is actually good. He said he hated communism for all the same reasons that I hated communism. Which to me I found very interesting. Basically, for most of the reasons that I hate communism, I hate socialism. Now, I'm not a fool. I know socialism isn't the same thing as communism, because communism is a political and economic system, and communism really comes from Karl Marx. At least what people know of it. And socialism isn't necessarily the same thing as Marxism. They're related and they overlap, and sometimes they're allies, sometimes they dislike each other. But for the most part, they have the same sort of economic philosophy. The only difference that I could see, if you accept socialism for what it is and communism as espoused by Karl Marx, communism, the way they would redistribute wealth, the theory that, or not the theory, but the principle that they would distribute wealth with would be what each individual needs is how you would distribute wealth. While socialism, on the other hand, they typically, and I'm saying typically because, putting labels on economic theories that are very similar is difficult. But socialism, they redistribute wealth based on how productive you are. So in that sense, I would say that socialism is better than communism, because at least socialism attempts to recognize the productivity of people. And it's more decentralized, which is something that you'll hear liberty-minded people like I talk about. People that like the Constitution, people that like libertarianism, classical liberals. Socialism does seem more geared towards liberty as opposed to communism. And as I said, I will be making a more well-written and carefully edited video similar to my Communism Sucks video. The reason why I'm doing this live stream is to add more content, brainstorm ideas, interact with, whoever decides to join in on the conversation. And I figured this would be a better way to do my Logan for Liberty podcast, especially since a little bit of less editing, and it's more of like a radio podcast type thing, I guess. And that way I can get the hang of live streaming. So that's fine. But like I said at the beginning, I reject socialism for many of the same reasons I reject communism. I take issue with wealth redistribution, essentially. And I know they would say that it's going to the people who are productive. I don't think. Well, let me talk about why I like socialism as opposed to communism first. Generally, communism, unless you're talking about anarcho-communism, which is basically socialism, libertarian socialism, communism is generally centralized control, which I hate. I prefer decentralized control. So in theory, I guess I'm okay with socialism on a smaller level. Voluntary socialism. Some people call that libertarian socialism. I'm not really sure what you would consider that. Not that it matters. Well, I guess it does matter. Somebody can correct me later on. Anyway, socialism is generally divided up into representatives, communes, or councils, which I like because it's more representative. But I don't like that either. Or pure democracy is how maybe socialism could be structured. I reject that idea. I don't think it's I don't like the idea of one group of people, whether it's centralized or decentralized, having control over other people. That's why liberty-minded people sometimes are more sympathetic to the Constitution of the United States, because it acted as it was a compromise between basically anti-federalists, which can be considered Confederates. A lot of them wouldn't be considered Confederates. A lot of them wanted states to be individual countries because they saw centralized power as a bad thing. And to a degree, I agree with them, which is why I think socialism is better than communism, although I reject socialism. Let's be clear about that. With that being said, the U.S. Constitution was a compromise because it basically took the federal government and was like, all right, if we were to put modern day terms on it, the federal government of the United States would have been a minarchy, a minarchist society. And if you don't know what a minarchy is, it's basically the idea of anarcho-communism, not anarcho-communism, anarcho-capitalism, which some anarchists argue is not actually anarchy because it has hierarchies. We can talk about that later. But it's anarcho-capitalism, but with the recognition that a state needs to exist to protect individual liberty. Hold on 1 second. My dog's laying by my feet. Yeah, go ahead and chew that, whatever. I lost my train of thought. My dog distracted me. Anyway, so what was I talking about? How liberty-minded people are sympathetic to decentralization. Yeah, so the federal government basically would have been a minarchy, while the states would have been individual democracies, republican democracies, or democratic republics, whatever word you want to apply to it, not that it matters. Basically, your vote, the states would have more power. Whether or not you think a state should have that power, that's besides the point. It's basically more localized control. And we see this issue with California wanting to split up into 3 states. I kind of support it. I support secession sometimes. I support states, dividing into separate parts. So, more local control, more localized control. You have, if you live in a rural town, the big city shouldn't be deciding your policies, and vice versa, which is brings us to an interesting conversation about the Electoral College that we can get into some other time. Probably around the next election, if I'm still making videos. That's something I would like to cover. But the thing with California is, in my opinion, I like it, but I don't like it. Basically, it'll just add 2 more seats to the Democratic Party and a swing state, which is alright, I guess. A swing state can be won by Republicans or Democrats. I'm not really a shill for either party. I don't think either party represents the majority of Americans. Although that doesn't mean I want a third party. Again, that's a convoluted conversation we can get into later. That's not what this live stream is about. As I said, I will be making a well-written and carefully edited video similar to why communism sucks. But without further ado, let's get on to why socialism sucks. I already listed some of the reasons why I think socialism is better than communism. But let's talk about why I still think socialism sucks. I support private property. That's one reason. I see private property in a way as a commodity. And again, I'll get into more detail later, but basically socialists, they see property, same with communism, they see private property as a means of oppression or exploitation. Because basically, if you're left-wing, you're typically against hierarchies. If you're right-wing, you typically accept that hierarchies are a natural state of humanity. So it really depends on how you grew up and the way you view the world. So private property, if you're somebody that owns private property, obviously you are, if we were to say that humanity was like a pyramid, and the more private property you own, you'd be at the top. And as we get closer to the top, more wealth is distributed to the top 1%. And even lately, Bernie Sanders has been saying the top 1% of the top 1%, because the top 1% is vastly different from the top 1% of the top 1%. Again, that's besides the point. I keep going off on these rants. It doesn't matter. Regardless, so if you looked at our social structure as a pyramid, that's a hierarchy. Best people at the top, or more wealthy people at the top, less wealthy people at the bottom. You get individuals that own a majority of property out of all property ownership, all wealth. Therefore, if you're left-wing, you tend to view that as something that is oppressive. I disagree, because one thing that socialism doesn't do is it ignores the fact. Well, socialism and communism, in my opinion, they tend to try to change human nature. Humans are tribal. They will always structure themselves. As long as humans are structuring societies, they will always structure themselves into hierarchical systems, structures. And we can get into the whole lobsters and Jordan Peterson thing, but that's not what I am here to do. I'm just here to talk about why I think socialism sucks. I think socialism, as I said, humans are naturally hierarchical, because the way we are, there's so many differences between each individual. Some of us are better at some things than others. Some of us are more intelligent. Some of us have more brain power. We're able to comprehend things better. Some of us have illnesses. Some of us are genetic perfect specimens, clean specimens. Some of us are Aryans. Some of us are Black Kings. Whatever term you want to use, depending on the race. Some of us are godlike. Some of us are goddesses. But the thing about being human is it's not just genetic. It's a combination between nature and nurture, between genetics, environment, and when I say environment, I am using that very vaguely. I'm talking about the social class, the way you're born, the way your parents think, the way you interact with other individuals, and it kind of branches out or roots out depending on what way you're looking at it, but it expands because there's so many facets to every single individual, and then when you interact with other individuals, it does have an influence on your life, on the way you think. Basically, did somebody bully you? That's going to shape the way you think. Was your girlfriend ugly? Was she hot? Have you been cheated on? Have you cheated on somebody? Did you take care of yourself through your diet, through physical health? To what extent? How tall are you? How capable is your brain of comprehending things, and how capable are you of learning new tasks? What altitude were you born at? What interests did you have? What did your parents pass on to you? What did your extended family pass on to you? How close of relationships did you? I could go on forever. And the thing about that is, if I say family influences you, okay, which family influenced you? How did your family influence you? In what way? And then we can go into each little micro interaction that happened between your mom, your dad, your siblings, your cousins, your grandmas, uncles, great-grandmas, great-uncles, great-aunts, so on and so forth, second cousins, third cousins, the holidays, the specific times that you've been with them. Or I could say, all right, well, environmental. Okay, well, what do I mean by environmental? Do I mean by your interactions with other individuals, which have the same amount of influences that are so vast and so complex? It's basically a multifaceted formula that creates each individual human. And then you as an individual human, if you don't mind me going into some weird hippie or metaphorical analogy, you're basically spreading the seed of your life, of your thoughts, of your emotions, of your feelings, of your interactions. Which is really crazy to think about. It's the butterfly effect. So there's so many things that can shape each individual, and there's so many combinations of these variables that can create an individual that is vastly different from an individual that just lives a block down from you. And like I said, that will make some humans dominate other humans in certain fields, whether it's athletic, intelligence, like creativity, so on and so we could go on forever. Humans are different, and as long as individuals are different and some can dominate fields better than others, there will always be hierarchies. Which is why I tend to reject left-wing economics, communism, socialism, Marxism, anarcho-communism, libertarian socialism. And so let's just go on to the reasons. I think I'm entitled to the fruits of my labor, and I know a socialist or an anarcho-communist or somebody like that would say, well, the rich are exploiting you, and you're the one doing all the work, they're not doing all the work, and they're taking all the wealth. And we can get into that in a little bit, but I'm going to vaguely touch upon that. A business owner has to take a risk. They have to risk a lot of their own wealth. Some people think they just get the wealth and then they're just sitting on it, and that's simply not true. And maybe I'll dive into that later. I will definitely dive into that when I do my more edited and scripted video, so I could really dive into these ideas. I support risk versus reward, meaning I think if you take a risk, you should be able to be rewarded for it. So for example, if you're just an individual and you have an idea for a business, but you're gonna have to take out a loan of $500,000, just $100,000. If your business fails, you're $100,000 to $500,000 in debt if your business doesn't take off. And the thing about businesses is you can look it up. It's 10 out of 12 businesses, or 80% of all business startups, fail. And it doesn't help that we have so many regulations and you have to hire lawyers. Therefore, it's hard to start a business in the first place. I don't know any numbers. I'm just trying to imagine like the most possible utopia. If right now, with all of our regulation, which we have more than the Nordic countries that Bernie Sanders likes to praise for being socialist, if we look at all of those countries, they have freer markets than we do. With that being said, let's say that out of every 12 businesses that attempt to start up, only 2 of them are successful. Okay, so what does that mean? Or how can we make it to where 4 out of every 12 businesses are successful, or 5, or 6, or 7, maybe even 100%, which will never happen? That's a utopia. Well, let's get rid of some regulation. So, because regulations bottleneck businesses. Imagine the economy is like a bottle. You have all the businesses in the base in that giant open space, and you're trying to shove your fist into a Coke bottle, a soda bottle, or a beer bottle. It's just not going to work. That's what regulation is like. I'm not saying we should do away with all regulation, but I think we should look at some regulations that are unnecessary, that make it harder for smaller businesses to either expand or start up in the first place. We can have, which is why I'm not an anarcho-capitalist, we need some sort of government to protect individuals and to sort out individuals who wish to redress grievances. If somebody harms you, you need to have the ability to have legal recourse. Nonetheless, I support private industry because I know there's a lot of people that think that libertarians support corporations and support the rich. That's simply not true. It's just that I don't hate the rich people. And corporations really only exist because a lot of people think that corporation is the same thing as a big business, which it isn't. They are not synonymous. A corporation is a legal entity recognized by the government. I don't think legal entities should have recognition as an individual. I think individuals should have recognition, not corporations. So a big business is not the same thing as a corporation. I support big businesses. I support small businesses. I support everything in between. Anything that offers a service and employs people, I like it. And I support private industry because without the government, most corporation or most businesses would be held reliable for their wrongdoings. The only way you're going to make money, I could walk down the street, I could walk down LA, I could walk down any major city in this country and say, hey, give me money. Just walk up to some guy and say, hey, give me money. I would say probably anywhere from 65 to 99.9% of the time, they're going to be like, no, go get a job. Go get your own money. Why would I give you money? You're not doing anything for me. That's the way the economy should work. You only, and in this system, cronyism, state capitalism, it's different. But capitalism generally, free market capitalism, most people aren't just going to hand you money. You have to offer them something to give you money. You either have to offer them a good or a service. A service like cleaning their house, unclogging their toilet, fixing their pipes, building a new section to their house, a new bedroom, rewiring their electrical, fixing their car. Those are all services. Now let's talk about goods. Either entertainers. If you entertain somebody, they might give you money because they want to be entertained. So therefore, they'll give you money so you keep entertaining them. But like I said, if I just walk up to most people and say, hey, give me money, most of them are going to be like, get the hell out of here. I worked hard for my money. You're not giving me anything. You're not giving me a service. You're not giving me a good. Piss off. Which is why I support private industry, because you have to offer something that people want in order to acquire wealth or resources or currency. Next on the list. So I wrote down that I liked decentralized power, which is why socialism is better than communism, but why I think capitalism is better than socialism. Why I still reject socialism, because even though technically it's a more decentralized system as opposed to communism, communism is more of an authoritarian state, while socialism is councils, representatives, or communities, communes, making decisions, or pure democracy. That's not what I think of when I think of decentralized power. When I think of decentralized power, I mean an individual is the smallest minority, and then from there they voluntarily give their power to the best extent. We do need some sort of centralized force, and then to protect people, so people can have a legal recourse. When I think of socialism, I really think of a hydra, a dragon with multiple heads. That's what I think of. Because even though it's all, all these communes, it makes one single centralized entity. I'll dive into that when I do my more scripted video, my more edited professional video about why I think socialism sucks. So let's go on. I support community over government, and I know socialism, it's more close to anarcho-communism. You have communes or councils, more localized decision over wealth redistribution, and you come together and you do that. So technically there is communities. But there's one thing that we see, especially in the black community, where wealth is redistributed from a force, because they're trying to be nice, but it incentivizes the breakups of nuclear families. It incentivizes individuals to be lazy. And I think that's a bad thing. I don't want to punish people. I don't want to punish those who are productive, which is why I reject left-wing politics. I know socialism tries to say that we are going to redistribute wealth to those who are productive. But who decides who is productive? Who decides what industry is productive? Who decides what jobs are more productive than other jobs? Which is why I support the free market. Because through voluntary transactions, through individual action, through you purchasing the services that you want, you are then dictating, through voting with your dollar, who is more productive in your life. And sometimes really shitty people get rich because they get famous. But they're entertaining. I don't hate the rich, which is why I don't want to redistribute their wealth. I'm not a shill for the rich either. I just don't hate them. I think if you've earned your money, you have earned your money. If you didn't steal somebody's money and people willingly gave you their money, I think that's 100% okay. And so let's talk about the top 1%, or especially the top 1% of the top 1% that owns most of the world's wealth. Just one second. We keep looking at wealth inequality as if it's this thing that needs to be, defeated. And to some extent, I guess you can make an argument that wealth inequality is bad, it's not fair, or it leads to the destruction of societies. I can understand, I'm sympathetic to that belief, but we keep conflating wealth inequality with living standards. So put this in perspective. Let's say you have access to a helicopter. Okay? Awesome. You have access to a helicopter. You can do so much with that. And this helicopter has air conditioning. It's comfortable, but it's kind of loud. But there's this one guy who has access to 10 private jets and 5 helicopters. But that's not fair because you only have one helicopter. Should you steal this guy who has 10 private jets and 5 helicopters? Should you take some of those helicopters and private jets and redistribute them because most people only have access to one helicopter? No, that's insane. Especially when you're thinking about it right now, because I think most people would be like, hey, I would love a helicopter. That'd be freaking awesome. My life would be so much better if I had a helicopter. That's wealth inequality, though. If you can only afford one helicopter, but the other guy can afford 10. He can afford 10 helicopters, 10 private jets, 5 helicopters, and maybe 7 yachts. I don't know how much yachts are. It's not something I'm knowledgeable about. But you can only afford one helicopter. That's not fair. Let's redistribute that. Why, though? You have a freaking helicopter, dude. Why would you do that? That's insane. That is 100% insane. You are all living a great life. But because he has more helicopters than you, that's how I think of wealth inequality. Let's think of how poor people in the United States, not around the world, poor people in the United States, the bottom 99%, the other 99%, let's talk about them. Most of them have access to a vehicle, more than one vehicle. Most of them have access to cheap food, sugar, fat, carbs and fat, and protein. You can get those things cheaply, and you can make the argument, oh, they're processed. Well, that's a choice. A lot of that's a choice. A lot of poor people nowadays, they're fat. You can say, oh, well, they're malnourished, but that's their choice. You can go to the health food section and buy something that's more nutritious. Those are all choices. We have access to more TVs. We have access to air conditioning. We have access to the internet and cell phones. Most poor people have internet and cell phones. Now you can sit there and go, oh, well, we need that to survive. Okay, we need that to pay bills and blah, blah, blah. Well, you can't write a check? And even if you did need that, that is a much more simpler life than people that were living in the 1800s. Do you know what it was like when you were living in the 1800s? You got up at 5 a.m. in the morning, you worked all day. You weren't doing this 8-hour shit, you weren't doing this 10-hour shit. You were working all day because if you did not work, you did not eat. But now we have the 40-hour work weekend, which wasn't created by unions, by the way, but we can get into that. We have the 40-hour work weekend. You either work 4 10s or 5 8s. And there's part-time jobs, but for the most part, you can afford to eat. You can afford to surf the internet, especially if you voluntarily pool your resources with roommates. Basically, voluntary socialism. We're living a better life than we ever have before, to some extent. I think we're missing ethics and morals. I think we're missing family. I think the nuclear family has unfortunately swindled away. I'd like to see that return. Our culture has shifted, some for better, some for worse. Gay people have rights. That's awesome. Black people have rights. That's the type of culture shifts I like to see. But there are some aspects like marriage, monogamy, the family unit that I think we need to bring back or that we need to preserve. Just think of what the middle class has access to when they fly an airplane. You can afford an airplane. I mean, you probably can't afford to hop on it, every single time you travel like a rich person might, but you are able to afford a higher quality flight than what a rich person could have decades ago. Just think about that. Think about how airplanes used to be. They were only accessible to the rich. They didn't have air conditioning. They had poor service, and the list goes on. So we need to stop conflating wealth inequality with standard of living. Also, I want to control my own money. I want to decide what services I get or use. I think highways, instead of... By the way, if you want to talk about, if you hate taxes, then what about the roads? The roads takes up less than 1% of the entire federal budget. But I have no problem paying for roads that I use. On highways, let's make it a toll road. That way I pay directly for the highways that I use. Now, maybe we can talk about having taxes at the state level or the city level so they can work on those streets. And maybe businesses want to chip in for streets. Either way, we're paying for it, but I'd rather it be as individualistic, as voluntary as possible. You pay for what you use. You're not paying every restaurant to stay open, are you? No, you're paying the restaurant that's providing you a service. I think that's how we should look at most of the industry in this country, including roads. Meaning I want to control my own money. I also have hope for individuals. I know there's a lot of shitty individuals out there, and there always will be, unfortunately. But I have hope for individualism. Because as an individual, you're weak. Okay? So what do? You create bonds, you create a tribe, and in this case, it's the nuclear family. Strong individuals make strong families. Strong families make strong communities. Strong communities make strong nations. It goes up and it goes beyond. Strong communities make a loving culture, a prosperous culture, a just society. Incentives are needed, and if there's no risk versus reward, or you're guaranteed some sort of income, or somebody else is deciding how productive you are, and I know you can try to say, businesses, managers, and bosses decide how productive you are, and not really, the market does, to some extent. And how productive you are in a certain job can change from business to business, and I accept that. That's true. Fine. You win. You get that one. Go for it. That's besides the point. Something we need to really understand is that nothing is free. And if nothing is free, then we should stop acting like it is free. Somebody's paying for it. So how about, as individuals, we pay for the services that we want or need? I think that's a very great idea. And government can't be held accountable. And I know you can say that as centralization. Communes, communities. Not communes and councils. Yeah, sometimes they can't be held accountable too. Which is why I think more power should be to the individual. And I think the more control you have, whether it's centralized or it's a hydra like socialism, when you put the state in and replace it over individual action, it replaces morals and ethics with authority. And I think that's a bad thing. And it's antithetical to liberty. I think we should be free. So, for those of you watching, I've been working on some jokes. I might get into stand-up, I don't know. I might make my jokes into videos. Who knows? I'm not sure what I'm going to do. But I was sitting there brainstorming jokes. How I could be funny. And I came to the conclusion that I sound condescending. I'm not really funny. But when I was thinking about socialism, I was thinking one of the things I was going to put in the video that I'm making, the one that I'm writing, that I decided not to because it wouldn't be professional. Yeah, I was going to say something like, for every 40 hours you work in a socialist utopia, 30 of those hours goes to the guy only working 10. And I might use that later on, either for some stand-up or for a video that I make. I'm not sure, and I might elaborate on that. I might turn it into a story. I haven't decided yet. Anyway, thank you for watching Logan for Liberty. It was nice talking to you all. I was coming at you live from the Pacific Northwest. I hope you found this interesting. I hope you enjoyed what I had to say. I hope you comment in the comment section down below. I hope we have a great conversation about socialism. And I hope we talk about better alternatives to socialism. Or maybe you can tell me why you support socialism. Or tell me why you reject socialism. Or even communism. Why do you like communism? Why do you reject communism? That's what I want to talk about. I want to have those conversations. I am open-minded. I want to hear your opinion. I hate socialism, and I listed it all within the last 35 minutes of why I think socialism is bad for humanity. I think it's bad for the country. I think it's bad for states. I think it's bad for communities. I think it's bad for individuals. Anyway, without further ado, I hope you all have a good one. Peace out, live long, and prosper.